Welcome to B2B in Flux. This is where we dig into how marketing, sales, and buyers connect in today's B2B world. What's working, what's broken, and what's evolving.
Okay, so welcome to the B2B Influx podcast. It's for marketers who understand the people and customers they're really selling to. In B2B software and tech marketing, we often talk about the buying committee. That's the CEO, the CFO, the CTO, the COO. We know the deal is rarely one person. It's usually 6 to 10 stakeholders all pulling information in parallel. But to the marketing team trying to reach them, those stakeholders don't always feel like real people. They stay as titles on a slide or a persona in a deck. This podcast is a set of short conversations with the buying committee, the real people behind those roles that you're targeting. I want you to hear how they operate day to day, the pressures they deal with, what they pay attention to, what they ignore, and which marketing content they genuinely consume when a decision is on the line. My goal is simple. It's to give you a clear edge to help you drop what doesn't work, double down on what does, and refine your marketing and sales approach to how buyers really behave. Today, I'm joined by Waehner. Kai is a field CTO who's been involved in multiple tech and software negotiations throughout his career. We're going to keep the chat informal and practical, focused on what buying looks like from his seat and what vendors get right and wrong when they try to win stakeholders in his position. Let's get into it. Kai, welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot. Great to be here.
So, Kai, you're not a traditional CTO sitting inside one company. You're a global field CTO, which means you see how technology decisions play out across hundreds of enterprises and you have a totally different view. So give us your view from that seat and what your role actually involves.
Yeah, absolutely. So field CTO is a pretty new role that was adopted by most software vendors these days. And in the end, it's really turning it around. So instead of looking just at one company and in the outside, how many applications do you need? Which software as a service do you buy? I'm from the other perspective. Of course, we only sell one solution, but I still need to understand the entire enterprise architecture and how it fits together. And I therefore talk to 100 to 200 customers a year around the world. And with that, I see the broad spectrum of how to adopt our technology and how to get it right at our customers.
Okay, great. So you're going to have some great perspectives on what we're doing here for helping B2B marketers understand that whole industry. So you will have been in the room for a lot of kind of enterprise technology decisions. Like when a CEO is evaluating something, what does that process actually look like from behind closed doors, and how different is it from what vendors assume is happening?
So first of all, I think the biggest change in the last 10 years where cloud was more and more a thing is that the discussions don't start top down, but very often they start bottom up. So it's typically not a conversation on the C level, but first people just use applications, right? And then the executives have the problem, then it's very often shadow IT. So you often start bottom up instead of top down. What's the goal? So in the end, also from our perspective, what we need to achieve is that the executives actually care and realize what are their people using, because otherwise you get a complete mess of many different top-down approaches to the same problem. And therefore, these days, what I see from the executives, they actually want to learn also from us. What are their customers doing? So I have met many executives, and when I come to them, our technology is already used there in very different levels. Some are open source, some are our products, some are cloud services. But this is really how the conversation starts, so that the executive level can make sure that there is a top-down strategy to introduce new technologies strategically and not just bottom up with a lot of mess and confusion.
Okay, so and is that how most companies are behaving now? They know it needs to come from the bottom up. Is that like the ideal, or is that how most companies are behaving?
It's definitely not the ideal, but that's a real world. I mean, if we take a look at a concrete example like generative AI these days with Claude, OpenAI, and so on, people are using it if you approve it or not, and if you have a strategy or not. And therefore, the executives like the C-level team, they realize this, and so they start from the top down. And this is in the end then where we can also help to have the right education, the right enablement, and bringing these strategies into the different business units. And very often it's large organizations. This is across countries, across teams, across very different interests. And this is in the end, therefore, still the preferred way, of course, to do it top down and to help people before they even find the challenges by starting bottom up with that.
So with B2B marketers, if they're looking to sell in a new software or technology, like who should they actually be trying to reach, given what you've just said?
I think both levels, clearly. Top down, this is in the end where we see many roles like developer, engineers, DevRel teams, where they really show demos and how to use the technology. Very easy to do with a button click. Consumption-based pricing, or if even for free in the beginning, right? So people just get started. But on the other side, from a marketing side, I mean, that's the same like what we do strategically, obviously. The marketing side has much more interest in reaching out to the executive level.
Hmm.
Here, I think there is still a difference. You often, depending on how big your company is and how your momentum is, it's not always directly the C level, but very often it's one or two levels under the C level. And this is still totally fine. Like, even if it's a technical lead architect who can make decisions, or one level on top of that, where it's the head of architecture or head of integration or head of analytics. So these are typically the levels where you can have a lot of impact from a marketing side if you do it the right way. And with that, then you can indirectly also influence the C level. And so with this, because everything across industries is somehow related to technology and like AI products and so on. So you need to always find the right explanation and fit, because only the very high level marketing, honestly, everybody has the same stories, right? You can automate everything, you can reduce a lot of cost. But how does it work, or does it really work? That's where you need to go down a little bit. And that's also what the C level understands. They alone, they cannot solve this. They need to understand from their first and second level to get the guidance about what to buy and what to choose.
That's really interesting. I'm involved with lots of B2B marketers marketing, and I often see that them targeting the C level. But having done this podcast and speaking to lots of people in your level, the story is very similar. That it's normally the level under them that's doing the major research that should be contacting. So I think there is a real shift that needs to happen in a lot of our industry when they're targeting people to just kind of, although it sounds like, yeah, we need to get in front of the C level, you kind of need that person who's going to help influence them probably first.
Yes, so how it works at our companies in the end, of course, everybody wants to talk to C-level, but they are not always interested. However, then the C-level is really more for the expansion play, right? So if you think about sales and marketing, you need to land and then you need to expand. And for the
Hmm.
land, which can even be bottom up, this is in the end where you talk to the second and third and first level after the executives. But then when you do expansion, like I have doing many customer meetings or even group meetings with many people from different business units, and that's then where we also get the support from the C level, where they talk about what we're doing already with them and we're successful. And then to introduce it more strategically, because that's exactly then also the interest of the C level to get it right with one vendor for a specific problem instead of having this bottom up adoption with multiple vendors for the same problem.
Okay, it's a really good distinction. So, Kai, you're a pretty prolific content creator yourself. I see with your blog, your books, and your conference talk. So you understand both sides of the question. You understand creating content to attract buyers and being a buyer who consumes content. So, like, in your experience, like, what's actually working? Like, what have you produced, or what do you see that works that kind of generates like real conversations that marketers can learn from?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And that's why actually as a field CTO, I'm actually in our company under the marketing organization. So I'm not directly related to pipeline generation or any specific quotas or numbers. But in the end, what I do is some people call it executive evangelist or executive thought leadership. So in the end, what I do, at least 30% of my time is I create content, like you said, customer webinars or book or articles, blog posts. And in the end, that is really about trustworthy content. So it's not product focused. That doesn't work anymore in today's world. And if you want to see a product demo or feature, you go to the website or you look at a YouTube video. But really understanding the value. And this is exactly also where the executives at the end user care about. How can you use the technology? And therefore, what works best for me? So this is very, very clear. I almost always lead with customer stories, and typically it's also industry specific. And this
Hmm.
is my approach now. I'm at the company I work for right now, Confluent, for almost 9 years. And with this approach, always leading with the right industry, like if I talk to a large bank, I lead with other financial services case studies. And so I always start at the top industry specific use cases and industry examples from proven case studies. And we are in a lucky position, we have many of them across industries. And then I map it down to the technology and use cases. And this way you're trustworthy from the beginning with the proof points. But I can also articulate why our technology is the right one and where does it work, where does it not work, and how it is a good fit in a trustworthy way. And this is really what works very, very well across all industries.
So it's industry, problem, then Kai. because and the reason I'm saying that is so many companies have been told to position your founder as a thought leader and things like that, but you're still saying that that should always be in the context of maybe industry problem, then the leader, the thought leader.
I mean, that really depends on the status of your company, right? When I joined our company Confluent 9 years ago, it was exactly what you just said. It was about the founder first and the innovation they did with some open source technology. But at that point, in the end, the reality is we sold bottom up because we
Mhm.
sold tech and we sold to engineers and architects, and that worked at that time. But now, first of all, the goals are bigger, right? And we're a public company and so on. So
Mhm.
it's a very different situation now. And the more you want to target executives, honestly, the higher you get, the less they care about technology and product, the more they care about business problems. It's always about increasing revenue, improving customer experience, reducing cost and risk. And so you need to map it down. And what I learned, and it really doesn't matter what level I'm on, if you lead with other customer stories from the same industry, if you speak their language, and
Mhm.
then if you're still able to map it down to your product, this combination is one of the hardest problems. Many people cannot do this well because you either are a very high level person that can talk executive level, or you can talk deep tech. But combining these, but leading with the industry success stories, this is really what makes the difference in customer meetings and workshops and presentations.
Mm. And you raise an interesting point then, and most people want to increase revenue, reduce cost and risk. Like, have you found when everybody's saying a similar thing, have you found something that's kind of particularly helping you stand out when you're trying to say something similar but different to what other people are saying?
Absolutely, because as you say, everybody says that, and even in our space like data and integration and analytics, if you go to any vendor page, they look almost the same from a use case and value perspective, right? So it goes even beyond the high level increased revenue, but you give examples about that, or for reduced risk, fraud detection is a great example, predictive maintenance, manufacturing. All people talk about the same thing, even though their technologies are different. And so the one thing that works is if I can talk about how a customer did it and what's the value there. And this is where we have great examples across all the industries, which I bring up. And this is the value explanation first, but then very important also, again, explain how do we fit into that and what part do we solve? Because the
Hmm.
reality is, when you talk about such a use case like fraud prevention in a bank or about predictive maintenance in manufacturing, the reality is this is always a big project, and the solution typically is just a piece of that. It can be a big piece, but it's one of multiple pieces. And
Hmm.
so tell the story first and then map it down. And this is how we help here and where we differentiate from others. But
Hmm.
also with that, then in a very trustworthy way. And this is how we complement others. This is why other vendors are here together with us. And together with the other vendors, with the system integrators, and with your business units, we can solve the problems like at this customer XYZ.
Hmm. Okay, really good. Okay, so I see kind of that you're publishing content about agentic AI, real-time data architecture. So here's a question I know that a few marketers have been having. Like, if AI agents are going to start doing the vendor research, evaluating solutions, and probably shortlisting options, like, do B2B marketers as we know it even reach the CTO anymore? Like, what's changing if agents are doing so much of the research?
Yeah, I see it more that agents are complementary, right? It's the same like in my daily life. I use Dutch language models much more than I use normal search in the meantime, especially for research, especially for summarize, especially for finding out new things. So that's definitely a key step every marketer should also use, and that's also how we enabled our marketing teams and our organization. It's not like we enforce people to use AI, but we recommend and explain them how to use it the right way, also
Hmm.
understand how it works and where it does not work. So if you don't understand that large language models also hallucinate, then you're in trouble because they're not always saying the truth and they're not always up to date. And therefore, with that, we see it more like it's complementary. But then, how do you reach then the executive, even though there is agentic AI and so on? The reality is back. You need to tell them something where it's not widely available and where it's not that easy to find. And that's back to my point about if you bring them customer stories and proof points and talk about your value in there, this is something what you can explain better. So, and this works on different levels, like reaching out to executives, but then also what is very successful these days in marketing, we do a lot of events with multiple customers because one to many or many to many is always better, especially on executive level. Like
Hmm.
we do, for example, financial services roundtable in London, or recently we had an automotive roundtable in Stuttgart, Germany, where we bring in many different accounts, and this is not just customers but also prospects, right? So, and we
Hmm.
bring them together. Customers love to speak from each other, speak to
Hmm.
each other, and this is even more true on the executive level. And sometimes the marketing and sales people are surprised how open these executives then speak about their problems. But the reality is, this is not where they differentiate. So they're very open in sharing their insights about best practices, lessons learned, what worked, what didn't work, for example, these days with AI adoption, because many things fail. And from that, they can all learn from each other, because this is not about their confidential IP that they talk about here. And this can be virtual, this can be an on-premise roundtables, can be anything, but this is the way we see more and more success. Bring in customer success stories or customers, bring them together, virtual or on-site, and with that, then you can scale much better. Because the other thing here is also important. Very often we do these measurements in marketing by leads, right? By how many people did we reach out to. The reality is, for such a roundtable, if you bring 5 good executives there, that's great, right? You don't need 50. You can easily get 50 engineers there, but for executives, it's a smaller number. But it's really more valuable if it's a smaller group. And so I think the targeting is less about the number and size. It's much more about the quality and how they fit together. Therefore, also like executives, an automotive executive can also talk to a bank executive, but it's much
Mm-hmm.
better if you bring together automotive people, suppliers, and so on in one room.
Really interesting. And do you find particular themes or ideas to bring people together have worked best for you?
I mean, from a topic perspective, it's always you need to talk about the cutting edge stuff at least a little bit, like in these days, AI, agentic AI. But you always need to bring it into the real world, because if you start with these statements like with agentic AI you can reduce your workforce by 80%, people realize that this probably doesn't work, and also it's typically not the goal. It's really about improving existing processes and how can this new technology work, improving your existing business processes. And
Mhm.
like, I mean, I live in Germany here. It's a lot about compliance, for example, a lot about data privacy. So you need to fit it into the right conversation, and also sometimes work together with the right partners. And with that together, then you get the stories right so that they are trustworthy and realistic. And with that, you bring people into a room or into a conversation much, much easier.
Okay, really good stuff. So we spoke about kind of talking at the executive level, and I know a lot of the people will be watching this who are selling B2B software and tech, that they have a lot of information on their site that if a technical evaluator is on the site, the things that they might want to see. So kind of go more into the weeds of technology. So when somebody's evaluating on a technical level, like what do they actually care about and what do they want to see? Like what's the biggest disconnects you've maybe seen, what marketing emphasizes and what the CTO or a technical buyer would actually be thinking about?
I mean, from an end user side, from the CTO or CIO, how they evaluate is typically not a features and function battle, right? So that's what this high level doesn't care about. Therefore, this is where often marketing goes a different direction. We have a new product feature, and we talk about it all the time with demos and so on, and that's great for engineers and architects. But the executives don't care. They care about the bigger picture, how to solve business problems, how
Mm-hmm.
to ensure that they get the SLAs right, and this is simply where indeed, still the CTOs and CIOs use analyst reports like Gartner, Forrester, IDC, and so on. So that's important. I think it's not as important as it was 10 years ago, because, as you mentioned, agentic AI, large language models, they also help them doing some more research, also broader research. But still, what I really like about these researchers still is they also still show you things like the ability to execute and how do you will get support from vendors, because at large organizations, it's not just about how does the tech work, but really also how can you deploy it in a compliant, safe, and secure way. And this is in the end also then very differentiates. And then
Mm-hmm.
depending on the business you need to solve, in our case, most of our customers run our real-time integration platform for 24/7. They don't cannot allow data loss. They need to have disaster recovery strategies if a cloud
Mm-hmm.
region goes down. And based on that, I mean, there's different vendors in our space. But if you cannot fulfill their requirements from the business perspective about the SLAs and so on, then everything else doesn't matter. No matter if your feature is a little bit better than the other one, but if you cannot solve these compliance and risk problems, then you cannot deploy this. And this is really key. And then second, of course, is the pricing. But pricing is typically not the first part. It's really afterwards when you realize, can this actually solve my business problem? And then you have different vendors, and then you take a look at pricing as one of the points. But it's
Mm-hmm.
much, much more about the trust about being successful over the years. So it's really more seen as a journey, because
Mm-hmm.
again, in most cases, while you wish it's only top down, the reality is it's always a mix with bottom up. And
Mm-hmm.
therefore, it's about a long journey where the CIO and CTO wants to trust you, not just in the beginning, but also for the 3 or 5 year plan.
That's a really interesting point you make there of seeing trust over time, right? Especially from a security and compliance perspective. So you keep hearing with these AI companies being very disruptive and just starting, but yes, they might have a great solution with products and features, but what they don't have is that history of experience, right? That is something that the latest companies are lacking.
That's part of the story, right? About how much did you already deploy? How large can you deploy? How can you support that? But also then more from an environment side, where can you deploy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Most large organizations are in multiple clouds or they are in multiple regions. If you're not just in the US but also in Europe, then you need to think about data privacy very differently for your entire offering with things like GDPR and many other requirements.
Mm-hmm.
If you go more into the Asia and Middle East, then you have many regions where you cannot even deploy in a cloud because there is no cloud yet. And so
Mm-hmm.
you have many different perspectives about how vendors can help you. And depending on where your business runs, and the bigger that area gets across different countries and regulations, the more you need the trust from the vendors. Or if you go into regulated markets, like into the public sector and government, this is where conversations simply are much more different. And it's okay to be half a year behind with a specific feature, but you need to deploy it safe and secure in a governed way. And therefore, there's so many big questions around which the C-level cares much more compared to a very specific feature that you can solve and others can't.
Mm. Maybe it's different in your industry, Kai, but something I've heard a lot of the other CTOs I've spoke to in this conversation is when they first get introduced to a new software or technology, their first question is, "Can we build this?" rather than "Can I purchase it?" Do you see that in companies as well?
I think this also changed a lot with the cloud adoption, and which is growing. So large organizations still are mostly hybrid, right? Like the banks still have 80-90% on-prem, but go more to the cloud. In the
Mm-hmm.
cloud, the conversation here is different because here they typically want to buy instead of build because
Mm-hmm.
it's the biggest concern of CIOs, CTOs is time to market these days. And this is where software as a
Yep.
service is perfect. You can just consume, you pay as you go. It's elastic and very flexible. So the only thing where I see organizations try to build first is if it's something where they differentiate from their competitors. And so this is where you build. For everything else, where it's more standard based, like CRM, ERP, analytics platforms, that's something where you buy because otherwise it takes a lot of time and costs a lot of money. And so you focus on building only the differentiators. That's what I see actually across most industries these days.
Interesting. So from what I hear from a lot of the clients we speak with, like CTOs at enterprise companies are some of the hardest people to get in front of because they got filters on everything, gatekeepers, spam filters, ad blind. It's like from your position, like what actually gets through? Like what's the path for a real conversation with a senior technical buyer?
So the number one thing that gets through these kind of blockers is if you talk about what others are doing. I said this before, but if
Mm,
I try to reach out to an automotive OEM, if I send them a message about, hey, this is what we are doing with BMW to reduce cost and improve customer experience, then they listen. Right. So,
mhm,
and they don't listen because of our product. They listen because they want to hear what their competitor does and how they could add value. And this is in the end the way to get through this. And based on that, then you can have deeper conversations. And again, very often even we do calls together then with these different customers because everybody wants to learn from each other and they trust other competitors more than they trust a software vendor. This is always the case. And only then when they are more interested, then they can map it down with us into the tech and into the architecture to go deeper level. But that's not the C level. And again, that's what their teams do for them.
mhm. Okay. So final question, Kai. So you've sat on both sides of you've been marketed to and you market it to technical people. Like if you could hold up a mirror to B2B tech marketers and show them like what they look like from the buyer's side, like what would they see that maybe they wouldn't like or maybe they would like?
I mean, what I still don't like is in the end, marketing is sales in the end, right? So they tell you all the stories you want to hear, and we're always doing the latest tech. Like everybody's talking about AI and agentic AI these days, even though many companies shouldn't, at least not that much. So this is definitely if you get a much more trustworthy perspective, if you look in your mirror, that works very well. And this is actually part of the reason why this role of the field CTO was more or less created in the last 5 years across most software companies, not just ours, and also large orgs and smaller software orgs. Because here it's really a different persona where you know these people are trustworthy. And part of that is also, I mean, a B2B marketing person is not responsible understanding the deep tech product because that's complex. That's what typically a solution engineer does for them. But being able to map this into the mirror that their customer executive knows this is a person I can trust, I can talk both tech and product, but also the business value perspective. This is really what shines. And so if you are in B2B marketing and want to also get that into yourself, not everybody needs to be technical, but again, my guidance is, and that's also where we start enabling more and more of our marketing colleagues, is that they understand the language of the customer. And therefore, we know, and we are not a large organization, right? But we have now done it in a way that our marketing people, they also partly focus on specific industries. So we have some experts more on telco, some others on retail, so that if you speak to a customer, whatever the level is, you can speak their language a little bit. And with this, I mean really use the words of the customer, like in automotive, OEM, smart manufacturing, 5G, SAP ERP, and so on. If you can do that, then you're much more trustworthy, even if you're just a marketing person.
Kai, there's been so much gold come out of your mouth the last 20 minutes, stuff that I can instantly see that we can put into some of the marketing we're doing for clients. So I really appreciate your time. If people wanted to learn more about what you're up to, because I know you're very prolific on social media, where would they go?
Yeah, absolutely. LinkedIn and Twitter or X is good. I also have a private blog. You can take out that. I have around 200,000 views a month, so many people read it, including some large language models, I guess. And I even have a blog post about the field CTO. Maybe people want to read that first as a marketing B2B person, because this is really where you can learn from how you can create a trustworthy marketing.
Great stuff. I'll put all the links in the comment in the description of this. Thank you so much for your time, Kai.
Thanks. It was great talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for spending time with us on B2B Influx. To learn more, head to somebodydigital.com.